am Captain StiK, and with me is Captain YoK. All right, today we are taking a deep dive into a world I think a lot of people don't even really think about. It's what happens to planes after they retire.
Okay.
So to kick things off, let's start with the basics. What triggers a plane's retirement? Is there like a set mileage, like with cars?
Not exactly. Commercial jets' lifespan typically kind of averages around 22 years. But with really good maintenance, some can keep flying for 30 years or even more.
Okay.
It's not just about age, though. Market demand for that specific aircraft type and the plane's overall condition,
Right.
those also play a really crucial role in figuring out,
Yeah, what its fate is going to be. It's a combination of factors. So
Yeah.
what happens next? What are the different paths a retired plane can take?
There are a few options. Sometimes a plane will get resold to another airline, operating shorter routes, something like that, or in a different region. Others get put into storage, just kind of waiting to come back into service if needed. And then, of course, there's the dismantling process for parts and materials.
So it's not always a final goodbye for these planes.
Nope, not always.
Speaking of storage, you can't talk about retired planes without those incredible airplane boneyards. Massive, landscapes filled with grounded planes.
You often find those in arid regions, like deserts.
But why not just store them anywhere? Why deserts specifically?
The dry climate's really key. It minimizes corrosion, big concern for aircraft, particularly metallic ones.
Especially for aluminum?
Especially for aluminum alloys.
Right.
Plus, the firm ground in the desert areas means you don't need to have those really expensive paved surfaces.
For storage.
Yeah. So deserts kind of offer this ideal combination of climate and terrain.
So it's all about minimizing wear and tear while these planes wait for their next chapter. Are there any particularly famous boneyards? I know I've seen some pretty incredible photos.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. That's probably the most iconic one. People call it the boneyard a lot of times.
Wow.
And it just houses thousands of retired military aircraft. It's pretty amazing.
I bet.
Then you've got Victorville Airport in California. They store a lot of commercial jets there.
Yeah.
And then there's Mojave Air and Spaceport, also in California, known for being very visually striking. And they also do a lot of aerospace innovation there.
It's mind-boggling to imagine these massive sites just filled with planes from all different eras of aviation.
It's pretty incredible.
You mentioned that some planes in these boneyards actually get reactivated.
Oh, yeah.
How does that work?
So it might seem counterintuitive, but it's more common than you'd think.
Right.
Let's say an airline has like a really sudden surge in travel demand.
Okay.
Or like some unforeseen global event. That means they need to expand their fleet really quickly.
Right.
Reactivating a stored plane can actually be more efficient than just buying a brand new one.
So it's like having a reserve fleet ready to go.
Pretty much.
But what does it take to get one of these stored planes back in the air?
Well, it's not as simple as just dusting it off and, hitting the ignition.
Of course.
There's actually a really rigorous process.
Right.
It starts with a meticulous inspection to figure out, what condition is the plane in after storage.
Right.
The mechanics are looking for any signs of corrosion, any damage, any wear and tear. Then they're replacing any components, fluids, seals, anything that's kind of time expired.
Right.
And then finally, the plane goes through a whole bunch of ground and flight tests just to make sure everything is functioning and that it meets all the safety regulations.
Wow. So how long does that typically take to reactivate a plane?
Well, it really depends on the size of the plane
Okay.
and how long it's been in storage. But generally, you're looking at anywhere from 40 to 100 worker hours to get it back to being flight ready.
That's quite a time investment.
It is.
So what about the planes that don't get reactivated?
Well, even if a plane is permanently retired, that doesn't mean it's just headed straight for the scrap heap.
Okay.
Actually, it enters a whole new phase one that's focused on resource recovery and sustainability.
So it's not a sad ending for these retired planes.
No, the journey continues.
But didn't the pandemic kind of throw a wrench into things with all those planes suddenly being grounded?
It definitely did. With travel restrictions and all, a lot of airlines had to make tough decisions about their fleets. A bunch of planes were put into storage, hoping things would bounce back quickly. But when the pandemic dragged on, some of those planes ended up being scrapped.
Wow, that must have been a logistical nightmare. All those planes suddenly needing to be either preserved or dismantled.
Yeah, it was a huge challenge for everyone involved. Reactivating a plane that's been in storage for a while is not easy. And neither is taking one apart safely and efficiently. It takes real expertise.
So even with a global crisis happening, the retired plane industry found a way to adapt. That's pretty impressive.
It is.
We touched on it briefly before, but I want to dive deeper into those incredible transformations, like turning them into hotels and restaurants and homes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about the boneyards and reactivation, but for some planes, retirement is less about fading away and more about just this like really dramatic reinvention.
Totally. What do you think drives that trend, of giving these planes a second life like that?
It's a few things. I think people just love novelty. They love experiencing something that they're familiar with, but in a totally new way.
Like spending the night in a jumbo jet turned luxury suite.
Or like eating dinner in a retired airplane cabin.
That's the kind of experience you never forget.
Yeah. One that comes to mind right away is the Jumbo Stay Hotel. It's near Stockholm's Arlanda Airport.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
Yeah. They converted a retired Boeing 747 into a 33-room hotel. And they even have a cockpit suite.
Oh, wow.
Where you get panoramic views of the airport. It's pretty cool.
I bet. What other kinds of planes have been transformed into places to stay?
Well, in Ireland, they've taken some retired Airbus A320 fuselage, and they've turned them into glamping pods.
Wow.
And then if you want something even more functional, there are companies that turn retired fuselages into home offices.
No way.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Imagine having your morning coffee.
That's amazing.
And they have kitchens and sleeping areas in them, too.
That's a serious home office upgrade.
It is.
But repurposing a plane doesn't always mean transforming the whole thing. What about just using parts of them?
Well, you're right. Not every retired aircraft gets a complete makeover. There's a whole market for individual airplane parts.
Okay.
Like engines, for example. Those are really sought after, even used ones.
How much does a used airplane engine cost?
Well, a used engine can cost up to $2 million.
Wow.
But that's still way cheaper than a brand new one.
It's like finding vintage car parts, but on a massive scale.
Yeah.
What other parts are in high demand?
Landing gear, avionics systems, even the seats, all of that stuff has value in the secondhand market.
What about the aluminum fuselage?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Okay.
Recycling aluminum saves a ton of energy. Like 95% of the energy you'd need to produce new aluminum and 90% of the raw materials.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. Huge environmental and economic benefits to recycling it.
So even when they're being taken apart, these planes are helping to create a more sustainable future.
For sure.
But beyond all the practical stuff, I'm sure some people just want to own a piece of aviation history.
Oh, totally. There's a big trend of people using aircraft parts in their homes or businesses. Like you can find retired aircraft seats that have been turned into chairs.
That's cool.
Or windows that are now wall decor, or even sections of the fuselage that are used in restaurants or bars.
I love that it's like a way to bring a touch of aviation history and adventure into your everyday life.
Absolutely.
What are some of the challenges people might face if they want to do that?
Well, it's not as easy as just going online and clicking add to cart.
Right.
There are a ton of regulations you have to deal with, right? Licenses and permits to own and use a retired aircraft. And safety regulations are huge, especially if you're going to open it up to the public.
Yeah.
And you have to know how to handle aviation materials responsibly.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So what about the actual process of getting the plane from the boneyard to your property?
Transporting a huge airplane is a feat in itself. Usually you have to take apart some of the plane to make it easier to transport.
Okay.
And then put it back together once it gets to your property.
Wow.
And then there's actually transforming it or repurposing it, which requires its own set of skills and expertise.
It sounds challenging, but I bet it's super rewarding.
Yeah.
So we've talked about transforming planes into hotels and glamping pods and all the challenges that come with buying a retired plane.
Right.
But what about the planes that don't get a glamorous second life? What happens to the ones that get taken apart for their parts and materials?
Well, that's when you get into a whole other side of aircraft retirement. Aircraft dismantling is a really specialized field. There are companies that only do this, and they have to follow really strict procedures to make sure it's done safely and efficiently.
Yeah, you can't just, start ripping it apart.
Right. It's about carefully taking out the valuable parts, getting as much material as you can, and minimizing any damage to the environment.
So where do they even begin with something so huge?
Well, the first thing they do is make sure the plane is safe to work on.
Okay.
That means they have to drain all the fluids.
All of them?
All of them. Fuel, oil, hydraulic fluid, everything.
Wow.
That's super important to prevent any spills or leaks.
Which could be really dangerous.
Yeah, they could hurt the workers or contaminate the environment.
So safety first.
Absolutely.
What happens after they drain the plane?
Then they start taking off the major components, like the engines and avionics systems.
Yeah.
Those parts usually get inspected, tested, refurbished, and then sold to other airlines or maintenance companies.
It's like a big organ donor program for planes.
I like that.
So those parts get a second life.
Exactly. Aircraft dismantling is really important for the whole aviation ecosystem because it lets them reuse perfectly good parts.
Yeah.
It reduces costs for the airlines, and it means we don't have to make as many brand new components.
So win-win for everyone.
Yeah, for the economy and the environment.
What happens to the rest of the plane? The parts that can't be reused?
That's where recycling comes in.
Okay.
The aluminum fuselage is really valuable as scrap metal.
Okay.
So they melt it down and use it to make all sorts of things.
Like what?
Like car parts, building materials, all kinds of stuff.
That's cool.
And remember, recycling aluminum saves a ton of energy and resources.
Yeah, we talked about that.
It's a huge plus for the environment.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything from a retired plane can be recycled or repurposed in some way. They take out the copper wiring, the glass from the windows gets recycled, even the fabric from the seats can be reused.
Seems like an aviation industry is really getting on board with all this sustainability stuff.
Yeah, they are.
It's clear that a plane's journey doesn't end when it lands for the last time. It's more like it's going on a brand new adventure.
Yeah.
So the next time you see a plane up in the sky, remember it's not just an amazing piece of engineering.
Right.
It's also a symbol of what humans can do.
Absolutely. It's a story that keeps going long after it touches down for the last time.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this episode. Thanks for joining us as we explore the world of retired airplanes.